Hello out there. This is Dustin Moyer, Public Policy Officer with the Colorado Health Foundation. Thank you for joining us in the first of our series, Advocating for Impact. At the Colorado Health Foundation, we continually ask the question, do Coloradans have what they need to live their healthiest lives? We view policy and advocacy as vital tools to ensure the answer to this question is yes. We are hosting this event to provide insight into the legal parameters of how nonprofit organizations can engage with candidates for public office. Attendees who are listening in can expect the workshop to help answer the following questions. 1. What can nonprofit organizations do to engage with candidates for public office within the legal parameters of their tax status? 2. How can engaging with candidates for office advance a nonprofit organization's mission? And 3. What are some of the effective strategies and tactics for candidate engagement? We are honored to have three presenters here with us today. Kara Lawrence, who is an attorney and expert in nonprofit tax law. She's a partner at Tierney Lawrence, LLC.
Hi, welcome everybody.
We also have Jake Williams, who is the executive director at Healthier Colorado, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to raising the voices of Coloradans in the public policy process to improve the health of our state's residents. Hi there. And Daniel Ramos, who is the executive director at One Colorado, the state's leading advocacy organization dedicated to advancing equality for the LGBTQ community. Great to be here. Thank you all for being here, and we'll go ahead and start with Kara, who will outline the legal parameters of what nonprofits can and can't do in this space.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and this is a really interesting topic, and I think I've been getting a lot of questions about this, so I'm pleased everyone's interested in it. I'm going to start off by noting that we are talking specifically about 501c3 organizations. There's lots of types of tax-exempt organizations, and they all have different rules. So we're going to talk about 501c3 organizations. Now, what the Internal Revenue quote is that a 501c3 organization may not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distribution of any statements in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to a candidate for political office. So this is an absolute prohibition, and it applies to public charities and private foundations both. Why does this exist? I think it's interesting to talk about the policy behind this. So if you remember, when people give donations to 501c3 organizations, they get a tax deduction for a charitable contribution. However, if someone gives to a candidate organization, a PAC, a super PAC, or candidate committee, that is not tax deductible. So the idea is you can't kind of filter tax deductible contributions to a C3 that end up benefiting a candidate when you couldn't do that directly. So that's kind of the policy behind why C3s are subject to such strict rules here, is because people are getting tax deductions for them. So that's really important. So people ask, though, doesn't this violate the First Amendment? You're saying, as a 501c3, why can't I say this? Well, in the 1980s, a Supreme Court case actually held that prohibiting 501c3s from stating opinions on candidates actually does not violate the First Amendment, because this rule is not about prohibiting speech. It's just saying if you're going to make this speech, you don't get the tax deduction. So it's actually a tax issue. With that, I'm just going to quickly say, I think some of you know that Trump did an executive order, President Trump did an executive order a few months ago, where he basically said that churches, which includes temples, mosques, and other religious organizations, don't need to abide by the rules we're going to be talking about here. So I'm not going to go into that, but my understanding is that the audience really isn't made up of any actual churches, synagogues, or mosques. So we're going to go into the rules as they apply to you, and there's a lot of lawsuits in terms of that Trump executive order, so we'll see if that stands. So let's talk about what exactly partisan political activities are, because some people get confused about that and what's lobbying. So partisan political activities, or as the Internal Revenue Code calls them, exempt function activities, are the function of influencing or attempting to influence the selection, nomination, election, or appointment of any individual to any public office or office in a political organization. So that includes any candidates ranging from the president to school board to RTD board to pretty much anything except for Supreme Court nominees. That's a legislative issue, which is a little fun note. So again, when you're talking about candidates for public office, it really goes, it's really broad. It goes, Denver City Council, school board, someone running for office in a political organization. So if you're running for the head of like the Democratic National Committee, that's partisan as well. So again, it's really broad. You have to be careful about that, because just because it's not a senator or something doesn't mean you're not being engaged.
Garrett, does this also apply to special tax districts? So in the Denver Metro, we have the cultural and scientific advancement tax. Would this apply for candidates who are trying to be appointed to those boards as well?
Not if it's an appointment, only if it's an election, only
Okay.
if it's a public election. If it's an appointment, it would be considered lobbying if you're trying to lobby in terms of someone's appointment. Let's talk about what directly or indirectly participating in political campaigns means. So I think people usually are pretty clear that 501c3s can't say vote for or vote against a candidate. That's pretty obvious, but I think it's some things that aren't so obvious that we need to talk about, because there's a lot of confusion. Besides not being able to expressly advocate for a candidate, you can't make donations to them or give money to them. Again, that could be pretty obvious. But lots of times you can't make inferences or imply certain things as well. So you can't, you can't get around this rule by not saying their name or by just making veiled references to them. Also, very interesting, there's an Internal Revenue Service ruling that if you use certain coded words, and the only coded words these include are those saying pro-choice or pro-life. That, if you say pro-choice, according to the Internal Revenue Service, that means Democrat. And if you say pro-life, according to the Internal Revenue Service, that means Republican. So if you said only vote pro-choice, only vote pro-life, that's considered to be an impermissible intervention. But those are the only two words that the IRS has said that applies to, but it's very interesting. So again, you can't endorse campaigns or candidates. You can't make cash contributions. You can't make what are called in-kind contributions. You can't let them use your mailing list. You can't let them use any assets. You can't let them use your office without paying for it. You can't, so if someone comes, if a candidate comes and says, hey, I want to use your building to put on an event, well, that's only okay if you make your building open to all candidates and they all pay you or you all charge them the same amount. Otherwise, it's a prohibited contribution.
What about original research? So research that either an organization staff does or research that's commissioned by an outside organization.
So if it's something that belongs to a 501c3, and that would be your original research, if you contributed that or gave it to a candidate for office, that would be impermissible unless that research is publicly available. So that's how you get around, not get around it, but that's the idea. If you're giving them some internal study you've given to them, and that's valuable information, you just made an in-kind contribution of valuable information. But if it's up on your website and they see it, it's up for anyone to see, and therefore it's not a contribution at all. So that's really where 501c3s and nonprofits can get tripped up a bit. They know the main rules, but sometimes, like, no, you can't give them your mailing list, you can't give them data. Lots of C3s might do polling data, things like that. You can't give that to candidates unless it's publicly available. So you have to be careful not only with direct contributions, but also with in-kind contributions. Let's talk, I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about these activities which are prohibited, but I'll just read it because when we go through it, we're going to say how to make this kind of work and how to make it permissible. So generally, what are prohibited for 501c3s are putting out candidate scorecards or rating candidates in a way that's considered to be partisan or to implicitly support or oppose one of those candidates. Doing candidate questionnaires that have that same kind of implicit support or opposition to a candidate. Accepting paid political advertisements, or attending partisan events. So those things are prohibited activities for C3s. So let's go through and start talking about the permissible activities, because as you'll see, there's probably a lot more that 501c3s can do in this area. And this is things that you can be thinking about over the next year, year and a half, as we're heading into the 2018 election season and beyond. So again, when you're talking about like voter education activities, 501c3s, one of their roles is to educate voters. So as long as you're educating voters in a nonpartisan manner, that is appropriate 501c3 activities. So the key thing here is how to do this in a way that's not biased. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for example, saying this person voted on this policy, and just saying it yes or no, and saying it in a non-biased, non-partisan way to educate voters that way is appropriate. Lots of groups do that. You might put out, here's a list of how everyone voted on various issues, and not say anything more, anything yes, or anything less, and that might be appropriate because it's educational and non-biased. Voter registration drives or get out the vote drives, those are also permissible for 501c3s as long as you do it in a nonpartisan manner. And what that really means is that if you're going to register people to vote or have them go vote, you can't target people who you may think might vote for a certain party or a certain candidate. And that's really where C3s can kind of get in a bit of trouble. It's that targeting issue. So if you just went to a neighborhood and you happen to know everyone there is going to vote Republican, or everyone's going to vote, or that neighborhood's primarily Democrat, and you only do your activities there, that's going to be prohibited, partisan, get out the vote activities, and that's prohibited. But at the same time, if you're saying, hey, we're just going to go where our members are, we're doing Denver metro area, or picking other nonpartisan criteria to determine who you're going to try to get out the vote or register to vote, that's okay. And here's an interesting thing that is really important for 501c3s to know. Again, you can't target your get out the vote and voter registration drives based on whether you think they're going to vote in a certain way. However, what you are permissibly allowed to do is target what are called underrepresented voters. Underrepresented voters are people who don't historically vote. This typically means African Americans, Latino community, young people, younger women, people who've been in prison or have felonies or in jail, and homeless people. And it could mean other groups too. I tell my clients who are interested in this, is like, if you find and you have data that these people are not historically represented in the voting process, you could target them. So for example, what this means is back in 2008 and 2012, 501c3 organizations could go out and just register people to vote in primarily African American neighborhoods. Even though it was later shown that 99% of them voted for President Obama, they were able to target based on the fact that they're underrepresented voters. They knew that that group would also vote Democrat. So this is where lots of groups that really work with some communities that aren't typically engaged in the political process have a lot of ability to really get out their message and help their constituents engage in the political process. That doesn't work in terms of you can't target older white people or white couples or older married women, things like that, because those are the people who typically vote. So that's really important. So candidate questionnaires and voting records is also something that C3s can engage in, but if they don't do it correctly, it can be very, very wrong. And I spend a lot of time kind of looking at these things. So again, it's really important if you're publishing records of candidates, their voting records or how they respond to questionnaires, that you have to do so in a way that's not biased or doesn't suggest a bias or how you may want someone to vote. And what this really means is, and sometimes it kind of waters down these questionnaires so much that C3s don't want to do them, but you can't just give them questions based on your organization's issues. There's an actual IRS ruling that said a pro-environmental organization gave some candidates questions only related to their position on the environment. And the IRS said, well, because you're a pro-environmental organization and these are your questions, we could tell who you support just by the nature of the questions and the structure of the questionnaire. So really if C3s are kind of giving out broad questionnaires, you really have to kind of give broad policy questions in there. You don't want to have leading questions. You want to go beyond your issue. You don't want it just to be, environmental or LGBTQ. You want it to be, throwing some tax policy or foreign policy or just things like that. Because the idea is you want to give a nonpartisan, non-biased thing. And a lot of times I run into this because the questions are loaded and how they're written. So sometimes it's an exercise in writing, just changing a few words or how you structure your sentence can take out some implicit bias. So those are, candidate questionnaires and voting records. It's permissible. You can do it. Just be very careful that there's not some sort of implicit bias. Other activities that 501c3 organizations can do during election seasons is to continue to engage in your typical lobbying and ballot measure activities. There's still, the government's still apparently functioning during the election season. There's still policy issues and legislative issues, and working on your typical policy issues should not be stopped while there's elections in progress. So you can continue to advocate for your issues during an election year. You could also educate all the candidates on your particular issue. If you want to go talk to all the candidates or send all the candidates information about why you think they should support or oppose a certain issue, or you want to educate them, that's absolutely fine. The key is you're going to all of them and giving them all the opportunity. Doesn't mean they're all going to listen to you, but you have to give them all the opportunity to educate them on what you think is important for your organization and your members. You're allowed to conduct nonpartisan public education training sessions about how to participate in the political process. So that's what we're doing right now. We're conducting this training, and you could also work with your members and your volunteers about how to also participate in the political process, as long as you're doing so in a nonpartisan manner. You could also work with all the different political parties to work on their platforms and things like that. So again, you could engage with candidates, and this is important to understand, and engage with political parties, as long as you make the option open to all the, I would at least say, main political parties, give them all the option to hear, and try to work with them on an equal footing. It doesn't mean they're all going to listen to you, but you have to give them the opportunity. You can't just go to that party or that candidate who you think may have a better chance of listening to you or pushing your policy forward.
Karen, how does that work, not only engaging major political parties, but also major candidates for a political party, who may be, there's typically the 3 to 5 maybe top candidates, and then you get some of your fringe candidates for a major political party, but how do you determine what major candidates for a major political party?
It's a difficult one because, as we'll talk about in 1 second, about hosting candidate debates, you're really supposed to have all candidates there. And I think, the IRS has said yes, because of monetary restrictions or time restrictions, if there's, 12 people on the slate, you don't need to have all the other ones. So there's no bright line rule that has distinguished that, as much as maybe what the recent pollings are saying, or to see if there's, front runners and who kind of really aren't even part of the mix. So that's about as good as the information we have on this. But it's important because I'm going to talk about now about hosting candidate debates, which is also an appropriate 501c3 activity. But it has to be done correctly. So first of all, why they're 501c3 in nature is they're educating the general public on the candidates and their position. So it's absolutely appropriate to have these debates. Some of the rules are that all candidates must be invited, but as Daniel and I just discussed, if there's some fringe candidates, or you can't have them all there, that's okay to kind of leave out ones that aren't really in the running, but you have to invite all candidates. Now, the problem that most 501c3s that I work with run into is that only some candidates agree to appear. What happens if only some candidates appear? You have to probably talk to your attorney at that point just to make sure. If there's only 2 candidates, you probably can't hold it, because then if you're only speaking to 1 candidate from 1 party, it's too biased. If there's maybe 4 or 5 and 1 doesn't appear, that might work. So you kind of have to play it by ear. But if 1 candidate of 2 major parties isn't there, you probably have to cancel it and not go forward with it.
And for those listening, I think that's a good opportunity to remind everyone that while Kara is an attorney, she's not necessarily everyone's attorney. So while these slides and messages will serve as a good high-level overview, if there are other specific questions, it's important that you seek out legal counsel to clarify those questions.
And I think everyone who's listening can understand that, it's kind of, everyone can probably understand this and get the point, but when you have a very specific question, sometimes it's very gray and it's hard to kind of fit it in there. So.
Here, I've got one more question. So if you're a C3, this relates to debates and surveys, and you either have a survey that you distribute to candidates, but then you don't redistribute beyond your organization, or if you have a forum within your organization, you don't invite the public, would that be permissible?
It possibly would be, because again, part of it is what you're doing with that. So if you're getting these answers back and you're going to rejigger them, the key is, again, if it's going out to the public, you have to do it in a way that's nonpartisan. So even if you're not just copying and sending it out, but you're doing some high-level overview, you have to make sure the structure of that is informational and non-biased. If you're giving it to the members in the organization, you still can't be biased with your own members in terms of this. So that's kind of the key thing, is whenever you're getting the answers back and putting out some product or some sort of overview of it, whether it's internally or to your members or to the public, you have to make sure it's coming out as non-biased. And, you know, again, lots of 501c3s have difficulty doing this because it really waters down what they're doing. And some of the times that those C3s have affiliated 501c4s, that's when they say, well, we're going to have our C4 do it, our 501c4, which has a lot more ability to engage in candidates and elections, because sometimes you're just watering it down too much. I always use a good example saying when you're dealing with these candidate debates or questionnaires, kind of think what PBS or NPR would do. You know, they're putting out information as kind of journalists and to educate people, but they try to leave their personal bias, try to leave their personal bias behind. So
but
that's
if you
kind of
only
key.
take it in and don't put it out, and the strategic purpose would be just to get people on the record. So in your future interactions with them, and say a legislature.
If you have some,
right,
if you have some purpose and it's going to be happening down the road when you're dealing with them on policy or getting ballot measures and legislative policies forward, yeah. I mean, again, what you're trying not to do is put something out there that's going to support or oppose them. So if you have other reasons, and if it's after the election, especially, because again, this is timing. So if you start using that information for your legislative policy and the election's passed, it's probably just fine. And again, just to finish off with the candidate debates, is you have to make sure your moderator is, you know, a neutral, good moderator, that the questions are unbiased. The questions should be prepared by, you know, nonpartisan panels or you know, individuals. I've often looked at candidate questionnaires or questions to be asked in the debates to be like, no, we have to reword that. And again, similar to the other issues, that have to have wide-ranging questions. You can't just talk about environmental policy if you're an environmental organization. You have to be really broad to make sure that educate the public who's, you know, witnessing this and hearing it gets a broad sense of the candidates. Another permissible election-related activity, and we talked about this before, is, again, if someone comes to you, and this happens, candidates will say, can I have your mailing list? Can I talk to your members? Can I use your space for something? It's fine to engage in what I call business transactions with candidates, as long as you do so on equal footing with all the parties or candidates, and either you charge them all the same or you don't charge them anything, you just, you know, donate it. So it's really important, because if you only charge one party and not the other party, one candidate and not the other candidate, what you're doing is making an in-kind prohibited contribution. And C3s are prohibited from doing that. And I know I'm getting close to my time, but so I'm going to end with just two like really important things that C3s can be doing right now. And I'm going to call this praising and criticizing incumbents. This also can be used as called, I've heard the term accountability work or other work. Really what it's doing is it's educating people's sitting elected officials, constituents about what they're doing in office. This is a permissible 501c3 activity. It's basically saying, hey, you sit in senators, or you sit and you represent so-and-so's district, and they just voted yes on this policy, or they just voted no on this. Now, it's not lobbying because the vote happened, right? So you're not supporting legislation, it's not lobbying. And it happened right after the vote occurred, usually during legislative session, and you're educating them. And it sounds a bit funny, but, you know, really what your elections and organizations are doing is they're, you know, voting against your mission in some way. You're really telling people, look, they voted against, you know, the environment, or they voted against, you know, healthcare. I mean, you see this a lot with what's going on now. How did Cory Gardner vote on, you know, whether they were going to revoke Obamacare? So when you're seeing a lot of these things like this is how they voted on this issue, that is C3 appropriate. There's some very important rules to do this. One is you have to focus on a legislative issue. The timing of your communication about it should happen right after the vote takes place. So it should be really during legislative session. You really have to stop doing this when legislative session's over. Some groups will do a wrap-up of how people voted on their issues. So an environmental group may say, here's how everyone voted on environmental policy issues. And then they have to stop right after the session's over, because then we might be ramping up to the elections. And if you continue doing that during election season, that might be all of a sudden what would be permissible 3 months earlier during legislative session, all of a sudden becomes impermissible because you're in full-blown election season. And, you know, this is also, you can also praise people like, thank you, you know, thank you, Senator Bennett, for voting no on repeal and replace of Obamacare. That's a 501c3 message if it happens right after he did that. So you could thank sitting, you know, public officials. You could say, you know, that was horrible. I hated your vote. Call them and tell them that their vote was horrible. You can do all that. Just be careful about the timing, make sure it's focusing on the policy, and make sure you're not having any kind of references to the election. So, and it's really important because I think this is something where you're really doing a lot of work, and this is why I think it's important to have this talk now at this time of the year, when, Colorado session is not, it's not in session right now, our legislature's not in session, is you could really kind of think about what's going to be happening in the upcoming legislative session in 2018, the issues that your organization cares about, and really focus on telling the public and telling your members how sitting officials are voting on your issues. And you could say, call them and tell them that you don't like how, and this isn't lobbying, this is after the fact, so I want to distinguish that. The vote already happened. But you could say, tell them that you don't like how they voted, their vote was horrible, or they're hurting you with how they voted, or you appreciated their vote. Thank you. Call them and thank them for their vote. You see that a lot. That is okay as long as it's post-vote and right after the vote took place, and don't keep, and it's also good to have a track record doing this. I think the more organizations do this on an annual basis, the more they do this versus maybe every 2 or 4 years, it really shows that you're engaging in educational activities to kind of tell people what's going on. And what this really does is kind of wind up that people understand what their candidates, what these people have been doing. So when they are up for re-election, it does kind of sink in their head, but it's not the C3 who's supporting or opposing that.
Kara, when you do what we like to call thanks and spanks, what are the implications on lobbying? So, for example, if you were to thank or spank a member of the legislature for voting yes or no at the committee level on a bill, but the bill makes it out of committee and it's on the floor, could it be construed that by thanking or spanking at that point in the legislative process that you are technically lobbying because that legislator is going to vote again?
It depends on how the message is worded. If you say call them and thank them and tell them to vote,
right,
again, so that it really depends on the message, but it could, if worded correctly, just be an appropriate C3 message to thank them. But if you're kind of taking another step and say, call them and say, and don't forget to vote that when it's, on the final, that would turn into lobbying, grassroots lobbying. And I'm going to end up with just a really quick but very important point. Nonprofits, 501c3s can't engage in this type of impermissible election-related activity. But your staff, your volunteers, and your board can, as long as they're doing so in their individual capacity. And this gets in lots of, people get a lot of questions. If you have a board member who's off, promoting or supporting candidates, they're allowed to do so as long as they're not doing it in their capacity as a board member of your organization. They shouldn't say, I'm on the board of this organization. They can do it individually. Same with employees. As long as your employees are doing this on their own time outside of work and not on work phones or work computers, they can do whatever they want. This really comes up especially with Facebook posts and social media. People sometimes have their work social media and then their individual social media. Sometimes people like to put rules in place. If you're going to do it on your individual social media, which is fine and allowable, you shouldn't have a connection or list your employer right there because it might become confusing on whose behalf you're speaking. So individuals, employees, board members can always do whatever they want in the political sphere on their own behalf. They just have to not distinguish, their position from the organization. And I'll just end up by saying, this is a very complicated area. You really, when you're getting into the details, you should really speak with an attorney. If you get it wrong, the potential is loss of taxes and status, so it's pretty tough. But sometimes I think it's important to understand it's not just potential loss of taxes and status, but it's your organization's reputation and ability to get donations. If you kind of misstep in this area, it can really hurt your organization's just in its reputation in the community. So I'm glad you're here to learn what you need to do to make sure you don't make those missteps.
Great, thanks, Kara. That was really helpful in understanding what 501c3 organizations can and can't do. For our next segment, we're going to kick it over to Jake from Healthcare Colorado, who has chosen to advocate in this forum and has done a really effective job. So we're excited to learn what his insight into this strategy is.
Hi, everybody. This is Jake Williams. So First, a couple notes on who we are and where we're coming from, but also some notes on how I tailored this specific content for a very specific audience. So Healthier Colorado is both a C4 and a C3. And in fact, most of what we do comes out of our C4. So we do things that C3s can't do, like give money to candidates and do legislative scorecards that may not be C3 permissible, for example. But we do a lot of other things that you all can replicate, at least in some form, in a C3 permissible way. And so what I've done here, on top of providing context for why you should do these things, is provide some examples of stuff that we've done that you can do as a C3. But first, let's talk about why you should do this stuff in the first place, okay? So when I'm talking to you all out there, I assume that you are a 501c3 that's interested in the health of regular folks, or population health, or consumer health, however you want to phrase it. And so when I say the other guys and gals, or gals and guys, there are other entities in the health space, other health stakeholders, other companies that, for example, sell consumer products, that have interests that might align with our perspective sometimes they don't. And it's important to know what they're doing to understand what we should be doing. So the folks who are in those categories that I mentioned and are displayed on the slide, they can do lots of stuff. They can do hard side giving, so that is donations directly to political candidates. They can do soft side giving, which is giving to super PACs or Prop 27s or independent expenditures, which are a little bit harder to track. They can do lobbying, which some of you guys can do, and they can do non-lobbying education, which all of you can do. And so what's important to take away from this is, since they can do all those things, you should be really good at doing the things that you can do, which for most of you are is either one or two things, lobbying and non-lobbying education. So if you look at kind of the level at which they're doing this, you'll see federal lobbying by sector, and health at the federal level is the most active lobbyist. That's hospitals, pharma, insurance, all combined of any sector in the United States. It's important to note. And then you'll see it among individual entities, 3 out of the top 5 are health related. Again, you've got your insurance companies, your hospitals, you've got your pharmaceutical industry. Again, once in a while, or sometimes, their interests align with those of regular folks, but oftentimes they don't, and that's important. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that they also do a lot of things on candidate spending at both the state and federal level. And this is just the direct or hard side giving that you'll see tracked there. You see they're all engaged in that area, and it's something that you should be aware of, and it does have an effect on candidates. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. And it's something that we need to contend with. Look at the next slide. You zoom in a bit on Colorado, and you'll see that at the state level, they don't spare any expense as well. You'll see all the different stakeholders within the healthcare system. I also have presented some examples of consumer good-oriented industries, and they're very active to capital, and they hire great lobbyists with suits nicer than mine to advocate their cases. And then the next slide, you'll see when it comes to hard side spending, again, at the state level, they play that game too, to the tune of, a lot of millions of dollars. I can also tell you that soft side giving is a form in which they engage as well. It's a little bit harder to track that, so I don't have specific numbers for you, but I know at minimum, anecdotally, that those numbers are often actually higher than the hard side dollars, because under law, there's typically no limits to what you can give, and so they give much more. So let's talk about stuff that we can do. There's 3 categories I'm going to present to you, and some of them kind of bleed together. But the first one is events. And the great thing about events is that candidates care about 2 things. That's money and people. And you can really leverage people to get their attention in some form. So the photo you see on the slide there is a forum that we had with many of the gubernatorial candidates here in Colorado, both Democrat and Republican, in which we did things like simply have them interact with people who support our organization to, so those folks could let them know what they think about health, and they can ask questions to see what they thought, the candidates thought about health. We also had a portion there where we produced oversized baseball cards, where we asked them both some fun questions as well as some health policy specific questions to find out where they stand. And the candidates on both sides were attracted to the event because they knew there were going to be people there, and also it didn't hurt that there was going to be a cool venue. So that's just one example of how you can use people and events to advance whatever cause or issue you're working on.
Jake, a quick question on that. Say I am a director at a 501c3 organization and I have an interest in hosting an event like this. Just from the logistic standpoint, what does that first call with the candidate look like, or even before that first call, how do you identify that person and then get on her or his calendar?
So depending on the level of the race, the logistics are slightly different, but the one commonality between them all is that if you go to, in Colorado's case, the Secretary of State website, they all have to make filings, and you'll find contact information for every campaign who has declared their candidacy in any particular race. And obviously, the lower you go on the rung of different races, from governor down to state legislative to even below that, the more likely you are to get in touch directly with the candidate versus a manager. But you'd be surprised how accessible these camps are. It really typically isn't that hard to get in touch with somebody.
That's good.
And then there's also friendly Google. I think every candidate now has a website. Almost every candidate has contact info, and they're way more responsive than you might think.
Great, thank you.
The second way that you can help candidates is just through leveraging your knowledge. So you'll see a photo on the slide there of a briefing book that we prepared for all the gubernatorial candidates that lays out all the issues that we care about. We actually didn't get very prescriptive even about the solutions. We just wanted candidates to be educated about the problems. And depending on how you do this, this is a permissible C3 activity. And I'd say within health in particular, this sort of knowledge is actually very much appreciated. Health is pretty complicated, and we found that candidates are often very appreciative of this type of resource. And then finally, you have what I call getting them on the record. And again, it depends on exactly how you do it, as per Kara's comments. But through candidate questionnaires, for example, the one you see on the slide there is one we did for the municipal elections in Denver that we made accessible to anybody and everybody on a dedicated website, or something that we did in accompaniment to the website is a telephone town hall where we got 70,000 people on the phone, and we invited candidates to have a question and answer session with the public on the issues that we cared about. So it helps elevate the issue in their minds and educate them and get them on the record so that it'll be more likely that they'll do the thing you want them to do. Or if they don't, you'll have at least a basis for accountability that you can act upon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Daniel.
Thanks, Jake. Daniel, go ahead.
Great. So as the folks have said, my name is Daniel Ramos. I'm the executive director of One Colorado. And what I'm going to review today, just to give a quick overview of One Colorado, talk again about why we do candidate engagement, and then talk about the sort of three levels as we think about how we engage candidates, leveraging the work of the organization, leveraging the work of our supporters around the state, and then also the work that we do in coalition with our partners. So One Colorado, again, is the state's leading advocacy organization for LGBTQ Coloradans and their families, and we work to secure protections and advance opportunities for LGBTQ folks in Colorado. And so just to give a quick overview of our organization, we have 3 different organizations, somewhat similar to Jake's organization, where we have our C3, which is One Colorado Education Fund, our 501c4, One Colorado, our lobbying arm, and then we also have One Colorado PAC, and we also have a small donor committee wrapped into that does direct candidate giving for pro-equality candidates. So when we founded the organization back in 2010, we did a statewide needs assessment. We really wanted to understand what are the needs, what are the experiences of LGBTQ folks in Colorado as a way to engage decision makers around the work that we were going to do. And so out of that survey came 3 key priority areas. One around LGBTQ health, the second around safe schools and anti-bullying for LGBTQ youth in schools, and this last piece is protecting our victories, sort of an offshoot of protecting all the wins that we've had, including marriage equality and non-discrimination here in Colorado. So for us, it's important to do candidate engagement because there's a long history of laws targeting LGBTQ people, whether they're laws dehumanizing or stigmatizing LGBTQ folks, criminalizing them in many ways, but also determining who could or whose relationship could or could not be recognized under the law. The second piece that we hear a lot, or we used to hear more so in the legislature, was many candidates believed that no gay or transgender people were living in their districts. And so as we did this statewide needs assessment and the work that we've done around the state, we've made sure that legislators know and candidates know that LGBTQ people are living their lives, that they're raising families in every legislative district and in every county across Colorado. The last piece that's important for us is changing the narrative about LGBTQ people to advance a pro-equality agenda, really thinking about, again, how we secure protections and advance opportunities, and that candidates have the opportunity to meet with LGBTQ folks, to hear their stories, and so that they can no longer say that they don't know a gay or a transgender person, because some recent data suggests that now 9 in 10 Americans know someone who is LGBT, but only 1 in 10 know someone who is transgender. And a lot of that has been done through a lot of the work around storytelling. So as we think about engaging our organization, there are a couple of different things that we do. So let me go back one more slide. So a couple things that we do. One is a candidate questionnaire. And so this is something that Jake talked about, is what we do on our C4 side. This is one where we think about the many issues that impact LGBTQ folks, from safe schools to employment discrimination to healthcare, to human services, to fostering children or foster youth, and even youth in the criminal justice system, to really understand how do candidates perceive the issues around LGBTQ folks, and how do we find out more information about where they may be. The other piece that we do is a legislative scorecard. So every year, immediately after the legislative session, we put together a comprehensive scorecard of all of the priority issues that One Colorado has worked on, ranging from non-discrimination to conversion therapy to advancing transgender equality, and even to expanding harassment protections, and we package it in a scorecard. And again, what's important to note about the scorecard is that all of this information takes a ton of time. It's public information, which is why it's helpful to package into an easy-to-read scorecard, and it's one of the things that we prioritize immediately after the legislative session. There are also ways that you can engage candidates with events, thinking of things like happy hours, galas, or in-district events, where candidates have an opportunity, again, to meet LGBTQ folks, to meet other LGBTQ elected officials, and to really hear from them directly about what their concerns are and what the opportunities to advance a pro-equality agenda may be. The other thing we focus a lot on is one-on-ones, really discussing our priorities and also giving language to candidates who may or may not know how to talk about LGBTQ issues, may not know how to talk about transgender issues, to use the right terminology, the right pronouns, and really to emphasize that language is really important in the work that we do to advance LGBTQ equality. I think another thing that's important to note here is really being in tune to adapting your approach depending on your candidate. Some folks you may have a great relationship with, some folks may be completely new to your organization. And so use that as a way to talk about either the leadership that you'd like to see at opportunities where LGBTQ folks may be under attack in this specific issue, or are there opportunities where we can find some common ground, and to really think of how do we make sure that we're not attacking transgender folks as an example, that's not leveraged as an issue to move a party or a group of candidates far to one direction. So think about how you're giving them your priorities and how you're talking about language. Also, a way to think about leveraging context and timing. So one example of this is, 2 weeks ago when the Trump administration banned transgender people from the military. We worked with candidates to make sure that they were speaking positively about our transgender service members, and that was an opportunity for us to have both Democrats and Republicans saying that transgender people are people, transgender service members are serving our country, and it's something that we should, and that's a community that we should respect. And so thinking about how you're using these moments, or maybe things that may be happening statewide or around the country to advance your issue or even your messages.
Daniel, same question I had for Jake, just wondering if your strategy differed at all on that, the logistics side of identifying candidates and conducting that first outreach. Do you use a similar approach, or do you have a different tactic that you use?
Yeah, so we use two approaches really. One is going into the Secretary of State's database to look at candidates. But we're also fortunate enough to have a lobby team who tracks a lot of this information. And so if folks do have access to lobbyists, or even some organizations, there are some organizations that track candidates. And so looking at using both, looking at the Secretary of State's website, maybe a lobby team, or even leaning on an organization who may be tracking candidate filings. There are some different ways to do it. Yeah, good question. And so another arm that we use to engage candidates is specifically around our supporters. So one thing that is incredibly expensive, but again, we will make the case always it's really important, is list building. You can either do some of it through targeting folks on social media, to say, sign a petition in favor of LGBTQ equality. But we are also fortunate enough that we get to travel to 11 prides around the state. So we're really in communities all around the state. Earlier this year, we did a 13-city statewide tour. And so looking at how we're engaging different communities, different conversations around the state, so that, again, we can go to candidates and say, LGBTQ people are living in your district, and let me introduce you to them, is really important for us. We also do an advocacy day at the Capitol every year. So this year we had our largest lobby day, close to 400 people, where we bring people from around the state together to talk about what our priorities are on LGBTQ issues. And we train attendees on how to do a lobby visit. So we introduce them to their legislator and let them tell their own stories so that our legislators can hear directly from LGBTQ folks in their district about the issues that are impacting them and their families. What's also important about this is you can identify activists to attend town halls or meet and greets or even do in-district visits. And so the more that you can identify and equip your supporters in the different areas of the state to have these meetings, the better off you'll be. So you can think about in a town hall setting, as an example, you may plant a question. With some of the town halls that have been happening, there's been a lot of conversation about healthcare. We've also had some questions planted about what happens with non-discrimination. Should LGBTQ people be protected from discrimination in employment? And so thinking about how you move your issues in a town hall context by getting folks to attend those events. And again, context and timing matters. There are a lot of issues that we can talk about right now, and there may be some really strategic opportunities where you can push an issue harder, or really get someone on the record as an iteration of some policy maybe moving forward. The last piece that we think about is engaging our partners. And so we do a lot of our work in coalition. We know that LGBTQ folks make up a really small portion of the population. And so it's really been the work of our allies and the work of our partners that have been so instrumental in advancing LGBTQ equality so quickly. So we do a lot of work building coalitions and training our partners on messaging. One example here is the work that we've been doing on conversion therapy and the partnership that we've had specifically with our mental health groups. For mental health groups to be talking to legislators about what conversion therapy is, what it does, and the harms of it is really powerful, where maybe an elected official may not want to talk with an LGBTQ person about conversion therapy. Mental health folks can talk about it from a mental health perspective. The second piece is really building relationships with local media and editorial boards. So how can you sit down with maybe an editor at a newspaper and talk about what your priorities are, sort of outline the things that you're working on so that those editors or their staff, when they're going to local town halls, can be asking about those issues, or as they're working their way through the legislature, or if a national issue pops up, that it really is the media that's asking the questions, and that they're asking the right questions because you've trained them on the language. And so this last piece of just really creating the echo chamber, really thinking about how are you moving your messages, how are you moving your supporters, your partners in your organization, to really be talking about your issues, the full range of issues, as a way to keep candidates engaged, and to also make sure that they're hearing it from multiple perspectives and from multiple constituencies. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And just, as we are coming to a close, a question for both you, Daniel, and Jake. We know that oftentimes 501c3 boards can be extra sensitive to risk. So I was wondering, when you were thinking about utilizing your full potential in this strategy, how did you make that case to your board members, and how did you assuage some of those fears that were brought forward?
Well, honestly, as a 501c board, we didn't have too much of a challenge there, but I can tell you, based on past experience in different types of organizations, that it's really important to get a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, not always like the typical in-house counsel you have, because a lot of times I found that you can have a legal counsel who is perhaps not as knowledgeable about the specific area of the law and is perhaps overly cautious, and can prevent the organization from doing things that they are very well entitled to do under law. So it's important to seek counsel with actual specialization in this area, someone like a Kara Lawrence. I think that's the critical piece.
Yeah, I would say the same. As you're thinking about many of the strategies you may be outlining, or even the ways that you talk about them, is really important to consult a lawyer, because sometimes some very simple nuances to us could actually get you in some really serious legal trouble. So that's one piece. I think the other piece in having the conversation with your boards, and again, we have a split C3 and a C4 board, but it's being really transparent about how we're going to use the different tools that we create. Is the candidate questionnaire going to be a C3 or a C4 tool? And where is it going to go? How is it going to be presented? Is our legislative scorecard going to be used again as a C3 or a C4 document? And what is the longer term strategy about the time it takes, the resources that we invest in creating that? And also, thinking about how you leverage the relationships of your board members. I think that's what's been one important thing for us, is having a really diverse board represented with both political parties, because we know that for us to be able to move our issues among political parties, we need connectors. And so thinking about how you either build your boards or advisory committees that can help you make those connections, again, because some of the work that we can do, we can only do if everyone is invited or everyone feels invited, and sometimes we need to lean on board members or other partners to help us get some of that work done.
That's great, thank you. And special thanks to all of our presenters, Kara, Daniel, and Jake. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your insight into this opportunity. And thank you to everyone out there for tuning in. Stay tuned for upcoming trainings. We have our next one on September 12th. Be sure you're opted into our newsletter so you can receive the latest communication on these opportunities. Just click join us on our website, and that'll allow you to receive all our communication. And with that, we will talk to you next time. Thanks.